The slap hit Walter Grayson so hard, his head snapped sideways, blood streaking the corner of his mouth as Derek Holt towered over him, breathing hard, daring anyone in the diner to move. Mara Hayes froze with a shattered coffee pot at her feet. Derek grabbed Walter's broken cane and slammed it against the booth. "This is you, old man." Then the floor began to vibrate. A low rumble rolled in from the highway until 200 Harleys surrounded the diner, shaking the windows. Derek's smirk vanished. The door flew open. Sienna Grayson stepped inside, eyes locked on her father's bruised face, with the Hells Angels filling the doorway behind her like a wall of steel. What she says next will flip the entire room and expose the one thing Derek never expected. Stay with this story and subscribe to Heart Tales, because justice is about to walk in. "You call this coffee?" The mug slammed against the counter so violently that hot liquid jumped over the rim and splattered across the chrome. Mara Hayes jerked back, clutching the pot she had been pouring from. It was noon at Meadowline Diner, sunlight spilling through the wide front windows. But the moment Derek Holt walked in, the air tightened as if the diner had been sealed shut. His shoulders filled the doorway, leather jacket creaking with each movement, boots thudding across the floor as he closed in on her. Conversations collapsed. A fork clattered onto a plate. Even the humming refrigerator seemed to hesitate. Mara tried to steady her voice. "If you'd like a fresh cup, sir." I said, "Do you call this coffee, or do you call this mud, scraped from a ditch?" He shoved the mug again, the sound sharp as breaking bone. Mara's hands shook despite herself, her eyes darting around the room for any sign of help. Nobody moved. At the counter, 2 truckers stared straight down. In the back booth, a teenage couple froze mid-bite. Near the wall, a young mom bounced her toddler, whispering apologies to keep him from crying. The whole diner inhaled but refused to breathe out. Then from the window booth, a measured voice cut through everything. "Enough." Derek turned, brows raised as if surprised anyone dared speak. All eyes shifted to Walter Grayson, 85 years old, suit jacket neatly buttoned, silver hair combed back, a cane leaning against his seat. His breakfast sat mostly untouched, but his pale, steady eyes locked onto Derek with unshakable calm. "She's doing her job," Walter said, folding his napkin. "Show her a little respect." Derek took one slow step toward him, then another. The diner shrank with every footfall. Mara shook her head slightly at Walter, pleading silently for him to stop. But the old man stayed still. "You talking to me?" Derek asked. Walter nodded once. "I am." A few heartbeats passed. Then Derek laughed, a loud, mocking sound that bounced off the windows. "Respect? Coming from you?" He leaned forward, palms slamming onto Walter's table, shaking the dishes. "You're a relic, a dusty old decoration someone forgot to throw away." He jabbed a finger at Walter's chest. "And you think you get to tell me anything?" Walter's voice stayed gentle. "I think you misunderstand what strength is." Derek's smile disappeared. "Say it again." Walter didn't blink. "Real strength doesn't look like this." The room trembled, not from noise, but from the weight of what was coming. Derek straightened, jaw tightening. Then his hand flashed out and whipped across Walter's face. The crack of the slap shattered the silence, bouncing off metal napkin holders and glass pie displays. Walter's head snapped sideways. His glasses slid down his nose. His cup tipped, spilling coffee across the table and dripping to the floor. Mara gasped, dropping the pot. Glass shattered across her shoes. The toddler began to cry. The couple in the corner ducked their heads like they'd been struck themselves. Walter didn't raise a hand, didn't speak, didn't even lean back. He simply lifted one trembling finger, adjusted his glasses, and dabbed the blood forming at the corner of his lip. Then he looked back at Derek with the same steady resolve. Derek spun toward the room, arms raised like a performer demanding applause. "You all saw that," he shouted. "And nobody's going to do a damn thing." No one met his eyes. Not a single person. He leaned over Walter again. See, they don't care about you. They're scared. They know I run this place. Walter exhaled slowly. People don't stay silent because they agree, he said. Sometimes they stay silent because they're waiting. For what? Derek barked. For the moment when someone like you proves exactly who he is. The words were soft, but Derek flinched as if he'd been struck. He grabbed Walter's cane, holding it up like a trophy. This is you, he said, slamming it against the table until it splintered. Old, weak, breakable. Walter watched the pieces fall but didn't react. Respect is free, he said quietly. Cowardice is what costs people. Derek shoved him back against the booth. You want courage? He sneered. Then stand up and do something. Walter met his eyes. I already did. I stood up for someone who needed it. Across the diner, something changed. A breath. A shift. The kind of collective tension that gathers before a storm. Derek didn't notice. He was too busy basking in what he thought was victory. Nobody's coming to save you, he said. Not one person in this room gives a damn. Walter's gaze drifted toward the sunlit window. That's where you're wrong. Derek followed his eyes, confused, seeing nothing but bright daylight in the dusty parking lot. What are you looking at? He demanded. Walter didn't answer immediately. He folded his napkin again, precisely, as if he hadn't just been struck. Then he looked up, voice calm as ever. You hear that? Hear what? At first there was nothing. Then, faint but growing, a low, rolling rumble, like distant thunder riding the horizon. A motorcycle engine, then another, then another. The glass windows began to vibrate. The silverware rattled. Mara's breath caught. The truckers looked up at the same time. Walter's voice lowered, almost a whisper. Courage doesn't always shout. Sometimes it arrives. The engines grew louder, multiplying until the entire diner trembled. Derek finally turned toward the window again, just as the shadows of dozens of motorcycles swept across the sunlit parking lot. The rumble rolled across the diner floor, like a warning sent through the earth. At first, Derek tried to ignore it, brushing it off with a derisive snort and a shake of his head. But the sound kept building, layer after layer, tightening like a drum line of thunder. The silver napkin holders vibrated. A fork clinked against a plate. Even the fluorescent lights overhead flickered. What the hell is that? One of the truckers muttered. Derek spun toward the window, squinting into the sunlight, as the shadows of approaching motorcycles stretched across the pavement like a wave swallowing the parking lot. Engines roared, multiplied, merged into something that sounded alive. Oh, you've got to be kidding me, Derek scoffed, attempting a laugh that came out brittle. Bikers? What is this supposed to be? Walter Grayson didn't move. His hands rested calmly on the table, sunlight falling across his bruised cheek. Not bikers, he said softly. Family. Derek whipped around. What did you say? Walter lifted his gaze. I told you silence isn't agreement. It's waiting. And you've run out of time. Derek's face twitched, confusion flickering before he forced the smirk back on. Oh, please. You think a bunch of weekend warriors are going to walk in here for you? He turned to the room, arms wide in another theatrical performance. You're all scared of bikes now? Really? Nobody answered, but nobody looked away either. Not anymore. The rumble was massive now, close. The windows shook. The sunlight dimmed for a moment as rows of motorcycles swept in, casting long, shifting shadows across the diner floor. Mara placed a hand over her mouth, heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The young mother whispered, Noah, sweetheart, keep your eyes down. But even she couldn't look away. Derek forced out a laugh. They don't even know who I am. Walter picked up his empty cup, turning it slowly in his hand. They know enough. Derek jabbed a finger in Walter's direction. You called them. An old man like you. Walter shook his head once. Didn't need to. Outside, engines snapped shut one by one. Not all at once, but in a ripple that moved through the ranks like a choreographed warning. Every silenced engine made the room grow quieter, the tension heavier, until the silence was worse than the roar. Derek stepped back from the window. "They're just looking for trouble," he muttered. "They don't care about you." Walter looked up, eyes steady. "You struck a veteran in broad daylight. Someone cares." Derek swallowed. For the first time since entering the diner, he hesitated. Mara's breath caught when she saw the first man dismount. A tall figure with broad shoulders and a cut emblazoned with the unmistakable emblem of the Hells Angels. Then another, and another, and another. The parking lot filled with heavy boots thudding onto pavement, leather creaking, patches bright in the midday sun. 200 riders at least. A whole chapter, maybe more. Derek backed up a step, then another. He bumped into a chair and swore under his breath. "No way they're here for you," he snapped, the denial coming too quickly. Walter folded his hands together. "You raised your hand against someone who earned their respect the hard way. That doesn't go unnoticed." Derek shook his head, pacing like an animal trapped in a cage. "They won't do anything. There are laws, cameras, people." Walter tilted his head ever so slightly. "Interesting. You weren't very worried about cameras a moment ago." That landed harder than any punch. Derek spun in a circle, searching the faces around him for validation. Tell him nobody's coming through that door for him." His voice cracked on the last word. The room stayed quiet, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet as before. This wasn't silence from fear. It was silence from witnessing justice approach. The engines outside faded into a low, simmering hum. Boots crunched on gravel. The shadow of someone large and steady crossed the window, then another figure behind him. Smaller, lighter, but somehow heavier with purpose. Derek swallowed hard, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. "Who the hell is that?" Walter wiped a final trace of blood from his lip. His hand barely trembled now. "That," he said, "is who you should have feared before you ever laid a hand on me." The diner door handle clicked, not rattled, not slammed, clicked. A calm, controlled sound that cut deeper than shouting ever could. Everyone stared at the door. Derek froze, breath held, shoulders stiff. The door swung open. Sunlight poured in around the silhouette standing in the frame. The figure paused, letting the brightness outline the sharp stance, the familiar leather cut, the unmistakable presence of someone who hadn't come to talk. But before the light revealed the first man, another set of boots stopped right behind. Smaller, lighter, yet carrying the weight that hit Derek like a punch he never saw coming. Walter exhaled softly. There she is. The second silhouette was a woman, helmet under her arm, jaw set, eyes already locked on the only man she had come for, Sienna Grayson, his daughter. And she had not arrived alone. Behind her, Ryder Cole, president of the chapter, stepped in with the certainty of a man who had come to collect a debt. Derek stumbled back so fast he knocked over a chair. Outside, the rest of the bikers stood like a wall of engines and loyalty, waiting for the signal. The storm had reached the door, and it was not here to negotiate. Sienna Grayson stepped across the threshold like a blade sliding free of its sheath. Noonlight poured around her shoulders, throwing a sharp halo across the diner floor. Her boots hit tile with a steady, deliberate rhythm. Helmet in one hand, jaw clenched, her fierce storm-colored eyes locked directly on the fading bruise across her father's cheek. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The room felt her arrival the way a field feels the first pressure of an approaching wildfire. Behind her, Ryder Cole filled the doorway, his height blocking half the sunlight. The Hells Angels president scanned the room once, taking in every face, every frozen gesture, every splinter of the broken cane on the floor. His expression didn't change, but his presence made the diner shrink around him. Mara Hayes had to grip the counter to keep her knees from giving out. Derek stumbled backward another step, his attempt at bravado collapsing under the weight of Sienna's stare. "Who the hell are you?" he stammered. Sienna still didn't answer. She walked straight past him, boots brushing the broken pieces of Walter's cane, and knelt beside her father so gently the entire diner seemed to exhale for the first time in minutes. "D," she whispered, the word tight with fury she was barely keeping contained.
"Who did this to you?"
Walter's fingers, still steady, still dignified, rose to touch her arm. "See, I'm all right." She never took her eyes off his bruised cheek. "You're bleeding." "It's nothing," he murmured. Ryder approached behind her. The sight of the two of them together, her fire, his stone, made Derek's breathing hitch. Sienna finally stood. The motion was slow, controlled, too calm to be safe. She turned toward Derek with the precision of a predator pinpointing exactly where to strike. "You touched him?" she asked. Derek swallowed. "Look, this isn't what it looks like." "What it looks like," Sienna said, voice dropping to a razor's edge, "is that you hit an 85-year-old veteran." People in the diner flinched at the words spoken out loud. They felt heavier, realer. Derek lifted his hands, palms out. "He mouthed off at me. What was I supposed to do?" Walter's voice traveled across the space before Sienna could answer. "You were supposed to be a man," he said. "Instead, you chose to be loud." Ryder stepped to Sienna's side. His presence alone made Derek's arms drop a little. "You laid your hands on someone who served this country long before you learned how to swing a fist," Ryder said. "You don't get to walk away from that without answering for it." Derek tried to laugh, but it cracked. "You're going to beat me up? All of you, in broad daylight with witnesses?" Sienna didn't move toward him. She didn't threaten. She just stared. The calm before the strike. The stillness before lightning finds the tallest tree. Walter pushed himself to standing, steadying on the booth with one hand. "See," he warned softly. "Don't." She didn't take her eyes off Derek. "He put his hands on you." Walter's jaw tightened. "If you start with anger, you'll miss the point. That's how he wins." Derek blinked. "Wins? I'm not winning anything. I don't even know her." Ryder's stare hardened. "Her has a name, and you'll use it." Derek licked his lips nervously. Sweat clung to his brow. "Sienna," he said quickly, almost tripping over the syllables. "Look, I didn't know. You weren't supposed to do anything," Sienna snapped. "You chose this. You walked in here looking for a victim." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried with lethal precision, slicing through every excuse Derek tried to muster. Walter put a hand on her shoulder. "Sienna." She finally looked at him. That tiny moment, a daughter looking at her father, shifted something in the air. Mara felt it. The truckers felt it. Even the mother in the corner felt it like a tug inside her chest. Sienna's jaw worked. She blinked hard once, pulling the fire back into her chest, letting control smother fury for her father. Walter nodded, approval softening his bruised features. "That's my girl." Ryder stepped forward. Derek stumbled backward again until he bumped the counter. "You're not getting out of this with a shrug," Ryder said. "You can walk out on your feet or crawl out on your pride. Choose fast." "I didn't know he had family," Derek blurted. "Everyone has family," Walter said softly, "even if they aren't in the room." Sienna crossed her arms. "You thought no one would defend him, just like you thought no one would defend Mara." Mara froze. She hadn't realized Sienna had even noticed her. Derek's voice rose into a brittle whine. "He shouldn't have talked back." Sienna took a step forward. Derek instantly shut his mouth. She stopped just out of reach. "You want to know something about my father?" she said. "He doesn't swing first. He barely swings at all. But he taught me when I was a kid that bullies rely on silence. They rely on no one speaking up, no one standing." "Please," Derek whispered, voice cracking. "I didn't mean—" From the counter, one of the truckers finally stood. Just stood. Not shouting, just rising. Then the young man in the baseball cap stood. Then the teenage couple. Then Mara. Then the mother in the corner. A quiet, unified shift. Sienna's eyes never left Derek's. "This is the part where you realize you're not the biggest thing in the room anymore," she said. Outside, the bikers stood motionless. Inside, the crowd stood united. Derek looked around, panic shuddering through him. "What do you all want from me?" Walter answered. "Leave." The single word hit harder than any punch. Derek swallowed, trembling, realizing the room wasn't his stage any longer. He backed toward the door. Ryder didn't move. Sienna didn't move. They didn't need to. Derek's own fear guided him backward. The engines outside rumbled once, just once, as if acknowledging the shift. The storm was no longer approaching. It was here. As Derek reached the threshold, sunlight washed over him like judgment. He paused, looked back one last time. Everyone stood. Everyone watched. Everyone waited. And Derek Holt, who had entered Meadowline Diner as the loudest man in the room, stepped outside into a silence louder than any shout he had ever given. 200 Hell's Angels stood in formation, silent, watching. Their stillness, their discipline, their certainty bent the air without touching it. Derek stopped dead, searching for any sign of violence, but found only cold, unwavering stares. Behind him, the door creaked again. Walter stepped onto the porch, supported gently by Sienna, watched carefully by Ryder. He walked slowly, but with intent, the bruise on his cheek catching the sunlight. Sienna stepped forward. "Look at him," she said quietly. "He stood up for someone who couldn't stand up for herself, and you put him down because of it." Walter's eyes met Derek's, not with malice, not with triumph, but with unshaken dignity. "You think strength is volume," Walter said. "You think it's fists. You think it's fear. You've lived your whole life believing respect is something you take." Derek's throat worked. "I didn't know. I didn't think it would go this far." "You didn't think," Sienna said. "That was the problem." Ryder spoke, voice low and grounded. "There are men and women out here who fought wars, so you could walk into a diner in a free country and have a cup of coffee without fear. And you chose to make fear your weapon instead. You hit one of the last people in this world who earned the right to walk through life without being struck." Derek stepped back until his boot heel touched gravel. "What do you want me to do?" "Nobody's going to touch you," Walter said. "Nobody here is going to hurt you." The bikers didn't dispute it. Walter's word was law in that moment. "What we want is for you to understand the weight of what you did, not through fear, but through consequence." "I don't know what that means." "It means you walk away," Walter said, "knowing every pair of eyes here will remember today. And if you ever try to break someone again, you won't find silence next time." Sienna took one final step, stopping close enough that Derek had to look up at her. "You leave this town with the understanding that respect isn't a word, it's a debt, and you owe it to every person you ever tried to intimidate." Derek's shoulders sagged. He looked past her to the line of bikers, 200 reminders that the world was bigger than his temper. He nodded slowly. "I get it," he whispered. "I'm sorry." Walter nodded once. "Go." Derek turned and walked across the gravel lot, past the rows of motorcycles, past the silent centuries of leather and steel. His steps were uneven, trembling, but he kept moving, not because he was forced, but because he finally understood. Consequences weren't fists. Consequences were all the eyes watching him walk away. When he disappeared down the road, the tension broke. Sienna exhaled. Ryder placed a hand on Walter's shoulder. The engine shut off one by one, no longer a warning, but a sign of closure. The people from the diner stepped out, gathering around Walter and Sienna. Mara was first. "Sir, I'm so sorry we didn't help sooner." Walter raised a hand gently. "You're safe. That's what matters." The trucker cleared his throat. "I've got a daughter your age," he said to Sienna. "I wouldn't have had your restraint." Sienna shrugged. "I didn't have restraint. He did." She nodded toward her father. Walter smiled, wincing slightly. "Proof that I didn't raise you wrong." The young man in the baseball cap spoke up. "When you stood up, it made me realize I've never stood up to anybody like that. I always thought someone else would do it." Walter nodded. "There's always someone else, until one day there isn't." Elena, holding her toddler, said, "I want my son to remember this someday. Not what Derek did, but what everyone did when it mattered." Ryder glanced around at the small crowd, discovering their own courage. "You just changed this whole town, Walter." Walter shook his head. "I didn't change anything. I just reminded them what they already were." Sienna slipped an arm around him. "You always do that." Walter looked out over the town he had lived in for decades. "Everyone talks about age like it's weakness," he said softly. "But the older you get, the more you see, and the less fear matters." Sienna helped him toward the truck. The Hells Angels formed a loose, respectful escort, honoring him, not guarding him. When they reached Walter's old green pickup, he paused. "You know," he said to Sienna, "when you get old, people treat you like a candle in the wind. But today reminded me some flames don't go out." Sienna's eyes glistened. "I thought I was going to lose you." "You didn't lose me," Walter said, touching her cheek. "You found me." Ryder tapped the hood. "Ride safe, and if you ever need us again." Walter finished through the open window. "Respect travels faster than fear." Ryder smiled. "Damn right it does." Sienna started the engine. The formation of Hell's Angels parted like a gate opening for royalty. The truck rolled out, slow, steady, proud. Behind them, the engines rose one last time in a final salute. Loud, unified, unbreakable. And that was the story of how a quiet old man reminded an entire town that courage does not shout. Courage stands. Courage protects. Courage endures. In the heart of a quiet diner, an 85-year-old veteran named Walter Grayson faced a bully's wrath with unwavering calm, teaching us a profound lesson about true strength in life. When Derek Holt unleashed his arrogance, slapping Walter and shattering his cane, it wasn't just an act of violence. It exposed the fragility of misplaced power. Walter didn't fight back with fists. Instead, he stood firm in dignity, reminding everyone that real courage isn't loud or aggressive. It's the quiet resolve to defend the vulnerable, like the waitress Mara, even when the world seems silent. As the rumble of 200 Hells Angels motorcycles shook the ground, led by Walter's daughter Sienna, the scene transformed into a powerful testament to family, loyalty, and community. Derek's bravado crumbled not under threats, but under the weight of collective judgment and unspoken justice. This story hits deep because it mirrors our own lives. How often do we witness injustice and stay quiet, assuming someone else will act? Walter shows us that age, frailty, or isolation doesn't diminish one's worth. True power lies in lifting others, not breaking them. In a world quick to celebrate the bold and the brutal, this tale evokes raw emotion, stirring tears of empathy and sparks of inspiration. It reminds us that silence isn't weakness. It's the pause before courage arrives, turning ordinary people into heroes. We all have a diner moment waiting. Will we stand or wait for the rumble? If this story moved you, as it did me, share the moment that hit you hardest in the comments below. Tell us where you're watching from. Your voice matters here. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of dignity, loyalty, and unbreakable hearts that refuse to back down. Let's build a community where courage endures. Hit that subscribe button now.